Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh, and when it comes to the world of products, companies will charge extra for different things. Better build quality, higher price. Unique design, higher price. Extra accessories, higher price. And simply being the best of the product line equals a higher price. And that's the part that I want to talk about. And that's what I kind of call the flagship tax. It goes beyond the cost of research and development. It goes beyond the build costs. It goes beyond the standard percentage of profit that most companies make off most products. Now, this definitely extends beyond the audio industry. It's cars, motorcycles, TVs, you name it. Now, usually you will see companies have a pretty thorough spread of pricing between their medium and low range products. They're usually pretty even everywhere in between. And then there's a big jump into their flagship pricings. So Meze, for example, has their $300 99 Classics, their closed-back headphones, and then it's a big jump over to $3,000 for their flagship planar. Sennheiser has the HD 820, which is $2,400, and then a big jump to their Sennheiser HE1, which is $50,000. Hifiman's Shangri-La Jr., $8,000, big jump to the Shangri-La at $50,000. Sony's second highest headphone, the Z7s, $600, the Z1Rs, $1,800. And then if you look at KEF, you have their Blade at about $30,000 and then their Muon at about $225,000. These huge jumps in cost for their flagship model. Now, I'm not just throwing shade at those companies. There are tons of companies that are doing this, and I think they're totally justified in doing it because at the end of the day, purchasing these items are an option. It's not required. So I'm okay with them setting the price at whatever they want. And if they sell none of them, that's up to them. So I see two basic definitions when it comes to purchasing products like headphones for value. There's value as in how does this compare against other comparable items in the market, whether that's in terms of how it actually sounds or how it's priced, or the structure of it if it's specific in its use case. And then there's the value of what is it worth to you to have the experience of either owning it or purchasing it, because that's not really going to be comparable to other items in the market because you might just only care about that item. So in terms of the dollar for dollar value, while flagship items do usually cost a lot more to produce, they take more research, they take a lot longer to develop. You had to pay employees to develop these products, and they usually will cost more to actually manufacture than a lot of their lower end line. And a lot of that stuff goes into the associated bump in cost. But when it comes to a dollar to dollar ratio, the law of diminishing returns is real. And as you go up in cost, usually your gain is not really equal to the increase in cost. And that's definitely true here. I also think that there's a big part of the value argument that's being skipped here, which is going to be that if there were no profits to be made, no serious benefits to be made in selling a higher priced flagship, then I think it's reasonable to say that you'd have less innovation in the field as a whole. Now, if you have a bunch of smaller priced items kind of competing for what's the top of the mid-range price, like what's the top at $100 or $50 or $500, you're still going to have a level of competition. But usually when you have these really big R&D budgets, this goes for cars, this goes for motorcycles and headphones and speakers alike, you get these big budgets to do these really crazy innovations in audio. There's a premium for that at first, and then eventually that stuff starts to trickle down. Now, if you're looking at this from a company's perspective, if there's no real percentage increase in total profit for selling the higher price items, there's not really a whole lot of reason to make them. Now, there is an argument to be made that there's an advertisement factor in it. Like, for example, Ferrari with Formula One. They're not selling those cars to anybody, really. They're keeping most of them, in fact. And yet it provides a source of advertisement to their lower tier cars or their regular consumer cars. So that aside, which is very hard to calculate because usually advertising is kind of, you throw a bunch of things in a dark room and hope that something sticks at a target. But if the profit percentages aren't there, there's usually very little reason to actually go in and invest in making a very high priced product for any given company. Now, the flip side, the consumers like you and me kind of end up getting the short side of the stick here because we have to pay for their development. And I guess if you're taking things as for my X amount of money, what item am I going to get? The flagship thing doesn't really make any sense. Now, all that being said, that's only one half of things. And At the end of the day, the part that I keep coming back to is that it's almost as if that aspect does not even matter. And the reason why is because the target demographic, the majority of people purchasing those flagship items, don't really care that they're not going to be the best value. And that's really what it comes down to, is there's a company willing to produce a product that a customer is willing to pay for. So there is a market for it, and a company is filling that gap. So the Sennheiser HE1, for example, all the relevant buyers, I don't think they're going to be looking at that and doing an analysis of, hey, like, what does this offer above other headphones in the entire headphone market? They're mainly just going to be looking at that saying, is this $50,000 that I'm going to spend on this worth the enjoyment that I'm going to have by either purchasing or owning this item? And for those people who do purchase it, the answer is usually yes. Actually, shout out to that headphone. It was actually in the movie Parasite. I don't know if anybody caught it. I just caught it out of the corner of my eye. I had to rewind it. But there's an HE1 in there. Actually, there's quite a bit of hi-fi equipment in that video. Okay, there's one more use case of this flagship tax that I want to talk about. This is my opinion. I don't have any proof that anybody does this, but for some companies, I do actually suspect this. I'm going to use a couple companies, but they're just for my idealistic example. So, I don't know any insider knowledge here, but I think that there is also a psychological aspect to a certain flagship. Now, what do I mean by that? Is let's say you see the Focal Grand Utopia speakers, which are several $100,000 last time I checked. They're very, very high priced speakers. Most of us can't afford that, but what we can do is look at it, and we can look at it and see, okay, they're using a driver that has this type of configuration. It's got this type of shape. The driver looks that particular way. And maybe we see something that sort of resembles that in some of their lower tier items. Well, psychologically, we might be purchasing that thinking that we're getting a small piece of that pie. And we can kind of look at it and say, okay, we're kind of getting a budget version of that super, super expensive speaker. Now, this is something that I think is going to happen kind of regardless of whether it's intentional on the company's behalf or not. But I do think that some companies tend to kind of play up this a little bit. For example, and again, I don't know that they're doing this, just the theory, those KEF speakers. Now, in this $220,000, the very centerpiece of it is this coaxial driver that is seen throughout the rest of their range, all the way down to their cheapest speakers. Now, there's probably multiple reasons for this. One, maybe it really does affect the sound in a way that KEF really, really likes, and it's cheap and easy to make, so they make it on their higher end stuff and the low end stuff because it doesn't cost that much and it provides this really great product and sound. Or my theory is that people like me look at those $200,000 speakers and assume that they're getting a small little piece of that in their $300 Q150s. Now, flagships, I think, can serve companies really well if they're utilized properly. They can be a status symbol for the brand. They can provide heavy influence in all their lower end items. They can psychologically stir people up to invest in their lower tier gear without ever having strong intentions of selling a lot of their flagship. You could even do a 2, 3, 4, 5,000% profit hike on an item to artificially inflate the price well above what it's actually kind of worth, but it's going to have a perceived status because of that price. And it's for all these reasons and a bunch of others why flagships from various companies exist, and why in certain circumstances there is a substantial flagship tax associated with those flagships. Now, to loop back around, is there a flagship tax? Well, it's kind of like an unstated thing, but yeah, I think it's fairly obvious. If you look at the price differences, they're astronomically high, and there's no way in hell you'd get me to believe that it was all spent in R&D or if it was all spent in materials. And I'd love to know your thoughts on this topic. Is there something that I totally missed or totally looked over, didn't calculate correctly? I'd love to see what you guys have in the comment section down below. So until the next video, which will be coming Monday, which I think is going to be of that Sony Z7, just as a quick shout out there. I'll look forward to seeing you guys on Monday for that video. And until then, my name is Josh, signing off.